because this is the first time this shot was ever taken. So if you can see at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, this is taken in 1968, the Apollo 8 mission. So when the capsule was heading towards the moon, the astronauts were trained in every possible eventuality that could happen. Given the technology that they had that would supply the power and the computer power for the capsule that went to the moon and went around the moon had less computer power than your mobile phone. I find that quite remarkable. And they were trained in every possible eventuality that could go wrong. And what was to happen is that the capsule would go around the moon, and at some point as it goes around the moon, it would lose radio contact with Earth. And there would be a certain amount of time that it lost radio contact with Earth. And they had figured out to the second as to when that radio contact should come back again. So as the capsule goes around what's known as the dark side of the moon, they lost radio contact with Earth. And as it's coming around to the other side where the radio contact would come back, there was about a 5-second delay or so. And they thought, oh, something's gone wrong, we've lost them. And what had happened is the 3 astronauts had their faces squeezed against a tiny triangular glass looking out of the window, because something they hadn't anticipated and no one knew would happen was that they would start to see the Earth rising on the horizon of the moon. And it's the first time that a human had witnessed it. And William Anders, one of the astronauts, had a Hasselblad camera literally next to him. So he grabbed it and got this shot. First time it had ever been seen by the human eye. It went on to various magazines around the world. And here it was considered to be the most influential environmental photograph ever taken. Now, there was a documentary about this as well, and all 3 astronauts are talking about it, and they still remember to the day this moment. They never forget it. And they had tears in their eyes when they were describing it, and it was moving to watch. And they said, this is it. This is all we live on. That blue ball in the middle of all of that darkness is our world. And it changed the way we saw our planet forever. Now, there's a similar dynamic to this. The individual that illustrated this, and this we'll get to this through the history, changed the way that we saw the body forever. Made a huge difference. Illustrated by Andreas Vesalius, and he'll come back a little bit later as I go through the presentation. But when we look at that, now we're used to seeing things like this, but the first time that this was illustrated, it literally challenged every view of anatomy that we had before up until that point. And this was in the, I think about the 1600s or so. So our view of the body has shifted, and it's continuing to shift by how we start to use some of the newer technologies to either image the way that the connective tissue structure looks, how we can now image the way that the blood network is organized, and so on. So my interest in this is how we start to visualize the structure, how we see the system differently. The word anatomy means to cut up, basically. So anatomizing something is separating. In fact, the word dissection means to separate, anatomy means to cut up. So it's kind of interesting because the moment we start to look at the idea of anatomy, we're already breaking down the whole. Now, we have to break that down to understand it, but can we then put it back together as a whole again? And what happens for a lot of individuals is that they start using the understanding of anatomy and forget to put it back together. So I see this, and Mark, this makes a lot of sense in movement and in dance. And I see this in the movement world, where we see a language in the movement world that the language that's been using is talking about holistic movement, but using anatomical terms to describe it. So all of a sudden, the movement practice has been broken up into parts. So how do we find a way to weave that back together again? And what happens at the end of it is a new language starts to occur. Now, we're not going to try and change too much of the language because you need to understand these anatomical regions. But one of the roles here for Anne and I is to hold the bigger picture for you, to keep realizing that all of the structures that we start looking into, we need to hold it in the context of the whole. I do a lot of dissective research, and it's interesting because cutting the body up in dissection means that we're beginning to anatomize. But what we do when it comes to fascial focus dissection, and I'll be using a lot of descriptions of that through the length of the course, is that when we're going to fascial focus dissections, we have to appreciate and respect what we are about to remove, not what we're heading towards. And interestingly, the moment we take a scalpel towards the skin and we start to just open up the tissue slightly, the moment we've done that, we've already destroyed the integrity. And we must keep remembering that. So my perspective will be looking to keep remembering that, because we're kind of virtually dissecting as we go through the course here, one way or the other. And we're getting under the skin. And something that quite incredible that happens with the body, and sorry to keep talking dissection speak to you, is as we start unraveling the body, even if we do it with images and even drawings for you, is that the landscape of the body gets bigger. And it's quite a surprise to us. And we had this with our group just recently in Germany, where we're working with a form that is donated to us, and they've donated to us for the reason for us to educate others from their body. And I see the time there, Anna. Yeah, is that once the body is donated, and we start unraveling it, we think that body is going to reduce as we start doing the work on it, but in fact its landscape and its mass becomes bigger because there's so much more to see. And that is mind-blowing, and it blows our minds every single time that we do it. So we can't go in there thinking that we know what we're doing. The body will come back and teach you another lesson sometimes.